We go. Okay. All right. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the KARL leadership team. It's just great to be here tonight. I will bet that just about everybody in this room knows a lot more about agriculture than I do. And I will bet that most of you know more about math than I do. But I'm hoping that with the combination of my background and your background, I can bring some context into what is artificial intelligence and what it might mean for rural communities going forward. But before I do that, I want to just tell you a little bit of background, the one that you did not hear in that introduction. My grandpa graduated from K-State in 1908. His name was Ray Snapp. He farmed in Belleville almost his entire life. And I remember going out to that farm. He was amazing. He could tell you every plant. He could tell you what every rock was and which ones had crystals in them, which was just like magic for me. And he knew where that hen put the last bit of eggs at the top of the barn for her chicks. He was just an amazing guy. Later on, my dad went to K-State and graduated as well with a degree in the ag side of the house. After he graduated, he went to World War II to the Battle of the Bulge, came back home, went to law school at KU, but he worked for a while as a county extension agent at K-State, where he walked in to the office of the dean of the School of Agriculture. And who did he meet? Mom. There she is. That story, you know, that was kind of pretty good for all of us, I have to say, my family at the table here. But they both had a great fondness for Kansas State. I'll leave the third generation out. They're sitting at the table. I don't want to make them too embarrassed by all of that. But the fourth generation is Jake, who's an agronomist now out of Colstead, Kansas, who also graduated from K-State. He is somebody that I look up to and I ask a lot of questions, which is really, really important for the work I do at the intersection of ag and technology, because I did something a little different. I went to KU and had a degree in broadcast journalism. This was a picture from 1975. I got my first job working for General Motors, as you can see, and I traveled around the country with 1,200 pounds of equipment in a van, giving 2 speeches a day, and living out of a hotel for a year and a half. So I was talking about technology. You can see really whizzy things here. There's a laser beam. There's a gyroscope. All these great things that at the time was the super science show from General Motors. And so I learned to talk about technology way back then, even though maybe my understanding wasn't that deep. And as a lawyer to the engineers, I've been around technology all of my life. But I would say that nothing really quite prepared us for where we are today with artificial intelligence. The launch of generative AI in particular in November of 2022. There was just a lot of hype about this at the time. And in fact, when this first launched with OpenAI, 100 million users tried ChatGPT within 3 months. So it sort of came on the scene, and you can guess what happened next. There was just a lot of hype, and the hype was far beyond what the engineering and the business maturity was. So we talked a lot about it before we really knew what was happening. You might say that today there's another hype cycle 4 years later. This one was positive. This hype cycle, you know, we'll admit, we're getting a little anxious, we're getting a little bit worried, and so we're perhaps in another hype cycle. And this will likely go on for the next 15 to 20 years as we see how this generative AI comes together. But I'd like you to know that it wasn't just out of the blue. It felt like it was out of the blue. But really, artificial intelligence started in the 1960s with the National Science Foundation and with DARPA. They did some of the original foundational research and the engineering research, working with things like computer vision, with search, and with robotics. And they began this work back in the 1960s. So if you think about what a quick history might look like, We started with what was called a rules-based system, and they were databases. So essentially, you asked a very specific instruction into a database, you got a very specific answer, or no answer at all if it wasn't in there. As we went forward, we started to talk about statistical and machine learning, where you began to have systems begin to predict, based on statistics, what the next answer might be. We moved from there to deep learning, where we learned that computers started actually suggesting decisions, not just predictions, but decisions. And from there went to generative AI, which creates new information, again, based on words and statistics in the natural language. This was the big breakthrough, to be able to use natural language and to be able to actually speak as though it were somewhat a human-like form. So this is the part that means generative AI. And we'll talk a little bit about large language models and the applications here in just a minute, but I want to really give you a sense of why all of this happened all at once. And there's three primary reasons. The first is basically we're able to just collect a lot more data than we used to be able to. That Hubble telescope there on the screen, that thing weighed 24,000 pounds. I mean, you guys, I have no idea the math about how that got into space. And it was the size of a school bus, basically the size of a school bus. If you have an iPhone 16, today, the capacity of collecting and holding that data is 1,024 times what it was in that Hubble telescope. So the first is the data collection. The second really is the cost of storage of the data. In 1987, it was estimated that the cost to store all the books, which were largely then, paper form, so you're talking about maintenance, you're talking buildings, you're talking people, that cost was estimated at roughly $1 billion. Today, digital storage, about $5,500 a month. So an amazing reduction in really the millions and millions in terms of the actual cost of the storage of the information. And the third piece is compute. The amount of compute power that we have today compared to what we had before. Now that Earth simulator on the one side of your screen in 2004 was an entire building of 70 racks of compute power. The NVIDIA chip you see, you don't get a good idea of scale, but it's about this big. It's really just about this big. And it does 6 times more the raw compute power as that simulator did 20 years ago. If you put some AI-enabled compute power in, it's 25 times more. If you think about energy efficiency, it's 40,000 times more than that original data processing center. Now, I also want to make a quick distinction between a CPU, which you all probably think about, that's what's on your computer and your laptop, and a GPU, a graphics processing unit, which is what these NVIDIA chips are. These units are roughly 24,000 times the amount of storage and capability and compute power as that original CPU that you probably are all used to. So again, the ability to actually process the data has gone up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds fold. Now, you all have been using artificial intelligence, whether you know it or not. The beginnings of it were the sort of auto prompts, when you're doing text and it might predict the next word that you're going to use. When you ask for recipes, when you do GPS in your car and you're trying to figure out where to go, that is all artificial intelligence of some of those earlier kinds. But today, we're in a new era. We're in the era of the generative AI. And just to give you a sense of what that means, it works on the basis of what's called large language models, which are huge data sets of information. Now, remember when I told you earlier that a database was structured and organized and a particular instruction came in and out? A data set is very different. It's a network. It's called a neural network, but it's a network that essentially tries to find the statistical probability of the next word that you're going to use. I kind of liken it originally when I first learned how to dive. There were some belly flops. There were double black eyes at one point in time. But each time your brain tells you, maybe you got to jump a little faster, you got to duck your head a little bit more, you got to lift your arms to avoid those black eyes, that's what the system does. And it learns by these various prompts. Some of them are human engineered, and others are just over and over again checking the statistics of what that data is. So let's think about it a little bit, and maybe a little bit of feedback from the audience. I know you're all listening really attentively. So it's essentially predicting the next statistical word and the probability of it. So if I said, I woke up this morning, there was a beautiful blue, you could say any of these, right? Right? What if I said, I woke up this morning, I looked up, and there was a beautiful blue, you might pick sky, right? If I said, there was a fluttering and I looked up, you might pick a bird or a butterfly, right, right. So it's essentially putting these weights on various words and predicting statistically what the next word will be. So then if you sort of think about what this is, the large language model is this huge data set of information with math and statistics. It's ingesting materials from all over, various data sets, books, documents, those kinds of things. It's doing this tuning statistically, and then it's allowing you to be able to do certain tasks with it, with what's called essentially the prompts or the applications that you all are using. Now, when you guys think about these data sets, you're probably thinking about OpenAI. Some of you might be using Anthropic with Claude. There might be a couple of other ones. The reality is that there are probably about 200 of these large language models that have been developed by various companies over time. And there is another category of small language models which are very specific to certain tasks. They might be related to healthcare or finance or legal. There's about 500 of these. So when you think about, you may often think about OpenAI and ChatGPT, there's like so many more. And some of them, they're fine-tuned in various ways for various kinds of tasks that researchers and people want to use. So I like to think about the stack of what the technology looks like. You get an understanding. A lot of people just sort of think, you know, that it's just this ChatGPT thing that you do. There's just so much more in the stack of the technology, starting with the land, the connectivity, the broadband, those GPUs I was telling you about, the actual data centers which house the racks of all the GPUs and run the compute power. In the middle of that is the fine-tuning, the foundation models, the data. And then layered on top of that are the various applications, the ways in you might be using generative AI today, and the ways in which researchers and other scientists and businesses are using AI today. So when you think about it, that little prompt, that's just the easiest, teensiest, weeniest, tiniest little piece of what makes up this technology stack of generative AI. And why is this really important? It's important because we think about generative AI as a general purpose technology, similar to what maybe the printing press was, or some machine tooling, or the internet, or broadband. And what does that mean when I say general purpose? It really means that the beginnings and the use of it really can apply to almost every sector, whether it's consumer, whether it's business, whether it's scientific. You can find applications in almost every sector, compared to like a single purpose technology. This is very similar to the sewing machine that I learned how to sew on. It had one purpose. It sewed dresses, maybe some other, it basically sewed. My mom made my prom dress on this sewing machine. And the only other use it had was when she remade it for my sister Joanne 10 years later. Never for me to see it again. But it was a single purpose technology. That's not what this is. And if we think about that printing press, when it really was invented in 1450 or so by Gutenberg, it spawned an entire different range of businesses, technology, innovations, all across the sector. You can see from bookbinders to paper to ink to distributors. And it really changed the course of literacy and knowledge in the world to allow people to have a printing press rather than books written literally by hand. So when you think about AI, think about that in terms of this kind of an economy. A more recent example is electrification. it was really important for the United States to begin to electrify in the 1930s and to ensure that it was diffused across the country. So in the 1930s, only about 10% of farm families had electricity. They were far beyond their rural counterparts at the time. The REA was formed in 1935, and as a result, a lot of infrastructure was put in place in terms of transmission and in terms of the ability to generate electricity. But the real, I think, one of the real pioneers of this movement was a woman named Louise Ann Mamer. Has anybody heard of Louise Ann Mamer? No, okay. I mean, she's like an extension. She was like the #1 extension gal of her time. So the REA hired her in 1933 or so. She went around the country to rural America with something called the electric circus. She demonstrated refrigerators. She demonstrated stoves. She demonstrated electric mixers. And rural women said, it's fine for us. And within 20 years, rural America had caught up with its urban counterparts in terms of its use of electricity. Now, what that meant was infrastructure build out. So yes, the transmission and the electricity, but hundreds of thousands of electricians had to be trained. And that meant apprenticeship programs, that meant colleges, that meant labor, that meant business all acting together to make all of this happen. So when you really think about this kind of a general purpose technology, there are 4 factors, really. One is the invention itself, the technology itself, the business models that come about. The second is how you adopt the technology. And then the fourth, and the most critical, is skilling and literacy so that people can use the technology. Now, as you might guess, I am going to tell you that generative AI is a general purpose technology, and that with it, you will see these other factors as well. We've already talked some about the technology. We've talked a little bit about the business models. Let me just sort of pause here on the business model. So do you know how OpenAI makes money? I mean, they're going to go public, and so is Anthropic. Let me just give you just a quick little sense. So OpenAI, it's a consumer and a business model. You have a subscription. Most of their dollars are made by subscriptions. What you do if you're just going on the internet is like the most basic form, but if you want more privacy, more precision, more access to ingestion of other data and models, you're paying a subscription for it. If you're using Anthropic, they are selling their models themselves to other businesses. So they are licensing large-scale, multi-millions of dollars to other businesses to use those models. And for Microsoft, we're sort of in that infrastructure. You know, we're doing a lot of work hosting all these large language models on Microsoft's cloud, Microsoft Azure. And then we're also sort of on that consumer side of the business as well. So I want to talk a little bit then about adoption. Right now in the United States, oh, okay, I'll go one more. Right now in the United States, about 30% of the population in the United States is using some form of generative AI within 5 years. It took about 45 years for us to get to that 30% with electricity. It took about 25 years to get to that percentage with the internet. So this is happening really fast. And if people really want to know how and use the technology, they have to trust it. They have to make sure that they think it's safe. So this slide has a lot of words on it, no pretty pictures, but I just want to talk you through a couple of these things, terms that you may have heard about. I'll start with hallucinations. Hallucinations is basically when you ask a question of a large language model in your prompt and you get back an answer that is just not right. It's false. It's false. Not only is it false, but it's so confident sounding that you just can't believe that it could be false, but you've applied some cognitive friction, so you know that it is. So that is sort of a hallucination, and why would that happen? It happens because this is a tool based on statistics, right? So it's just predicting what might be the next word, so it's probably not been fine-tuned enough to get to the right one. It also depends on what data is in the model. So these first couple of years with generative AI, they were sort of closed large language models. They did not ingest the internet. So if you asked that model in those early days, 2023, a question about something that happened in 2025, they didn't ingest the internet till about 2 years later. So you know you were going to get, it wouldn't give you the right answer to sports or political kinds of things or other news of the day because it just didn't have it in the data set. When you think about bias, that's really when the model and asking a question might come up with something that's unfair, it's discriminatory. That, again, is based on what that data set is and the models. This has gotten a lot better in the last 3 years. Those early models, have now been fine-tuned. We have internet ingestion, and we have a lot of work. But if you want to really be careful about these things, there's a couple things you can do. Just know a little bit about what tool you're using is kind of the first thing. The second is ask as precise a question with as much detail as you can think of, because that will help to predict the statistics. That will help to predict the statistics. So the other then sort of thing to do is ask it for sources. Ask it to give you, like when I was doing research for tonight, I said, I search Microsoft for this information and search K-State for this information and return that with a site, a source. And that will help you then ensure that you're getting the most accurate information. Now, jailbreaking, that's what the bad guys do. Those are the guys who try to come in, break the system. Those are the guys who want to do bad things, harmful things, get information that they shouldn't have. Those guys are always going to be there. But we have good guys too. We have lots of good guys too. So this responsible AI and red teaming is the work that's been done by large tech companies to guard against and to continue to improve the systems. So for example, at Microsoft, the responsible AI team was started about 9 years ago. It's within the legal department. It has engineers, computer science engineers. It has anthropologists. It has sociologists. It has lawyers. It has anthropologists who come together to literally test the system. So whenever an application at Microsoft is using generative AI, there are also evangelists within those engineering groups who identify whether that's a sensitive use, whether it might cause harm to someone, whether it might create discrimination, say in banking or finance. They bring that application to the Office of Responsible AI. The engineers continue to test it, but there's also a red team composed entirely of humans who try to jailbreak that bad stuff, who try to jailbreak it before it's released. And that work continues on and on and on with every product and gets better over time. All major tech companies do this responsible AI and red teaming, but it is a process. It will continue to be a process. So again, just apply some of that cognitive friction when you're thinking about doing this work. Now, I also just want to really quickly talk about data centers, because clearly the compute power is in the data centers. This was one I visited in Dublin a while back. And lots of wind power there, as you might imagine, in Dublin coming in from the sea. So that was really helpful in terms of energy. These data centers may seem like a black box. In reality, it's the most boring tour you could ever take. It is really the most boring. It looks like this. It really looks like this. To get into the data center was far more onerous in terms of security than to get into a tour of the Pentagon that I took a couple of years later. I mean, you swab your hands, you swab your feet, you take everything out of your pockets, and when you leave the data center, you do exactly the same thing. But once you're inside, it is just cables plugged in to racks. And data going back, that's it. It's like, that's kind of it. Now, there should be transparency though. You should be able to have minimal NDAs so that you know who is building the data center. They should be able to work with the local utility companies to identify how much water is going to be used, how much electricity is going to be used. Data centers should be good neighbors. They should be good neighbors. They should work not to increase electricity. They should work to replenish and recool water. They should work to create jobs, construction, electrician, local trained people to do jobs in the area. They should add to the tax base to build the infrastructure in rural America. And they should invest in training for everyone in the community and to invest also in nonprofits as well. So when you think about this coming, and I know there are some issues coming, think about what a data center should do to become a good neighbor. Now, we've talked a little bit about the technology. I want to turn over to the skilling and the adoption piece of it. And in order to do that, you all know that K-State is really a unique place. But let me just sort of remind you of like how special it is. The Morrill Act was 1962 and signed in 1962 to create the land-grant universities and to bequeath some of the land. K-State, within 6 months, had founded this university during the Civil War. The first class was 52 students, as many women as men in that class, and from the beginning admitted African American students. So K-State just has a legacy that is unparalleled in thinking about the role of land grants to advance research, agriculture, and the mechanical arts. And they do that by extension. I told you a little bit about my dad, but here are some really old examples. You probably have all heard about George Washington Carver and his Jessup wagon that went around the rural community bringing information about crops and how to plant and soil health to his community. And the National Corn Club, this kid in 1912, his name was Marius Malgrum. I forget, he was from Virginia. He quadrupled the corn yield with new innovative techniques that were learned from 4-H, which of course are closely aligned with the land-grant universities. And you all know 4-H. 6 million kids in 4-H today, growing to 10 million. I sit on a board called the AI Advisory Committee where we're really working to think about how to do more training around AI, both for students, but most importantly, for the educators and for the hundreds of thousands of volunteers. So this work of the land-grant universities is incredibly important from that perspective. And you all know about the research. Kansas State University, best in the world on some of the grain research. Sorghum, the climate resilient crop, more and more, and we're doing more and more work in that regard. The second, got to go back to my state, Washington State, the Cosmic Crisp apple. The Cosmic Crisp has been gene edited, it stays fresher longer, it tastes great, but what you may not know is that those apples don't grow on trees, big trees. They grow on lattices and bushes, which is another example of how the trees have been genetically modified so that they can more efficiently harvest the crop and ensure that the crop gets the inputs that it needs. And then Michigan State, I'm going back there because Michigan was where I lived for 10 or so years. Michigan State University, you may not know it, it is a world leader in sustainable packaging. Packaging for agricultural items, for retail kinds of things, and they are some of the best in the world at that. So the role of the land grants is absolutely critical as we think about adoption of technology, including the adoption of artificial intelligence. And I don't really also need to tell this room that agriculture leads almost any other sector in terms of the amount of efficiency and productivity that it has been able to realize in the last 50 years. Now, driving up here today, I saw the wheat crop. And I know it's hard. I know it's hard, and so it's a bad year, not a great year. But overall, what the ag sector has been able to do with the innovation of people in this room and researchers and scientists is just really unparalleled. So if you think about opportunities for artificial intelligence, you can think about that, some of that modification early on. You can think about precision ag and all the ways in which inputs are applied very specifically so that you're not overdoing it, but you're not underdoing it either. Managing soil health, managing sensors with drones, satellite imagery. There are essentially everywhere along the way places where artificial intelligence will be important. Now, I say important. It doesn't replace Matt Moreland in the room here. It doesn't replace Jay Armstrong in the room here, because you guys are the ones who know how to use it and use it more efficiently. It doesn't replace my agronomist nephew, Jake. Jake will use those tools. but this will hopefully apply in a positive way across all of these sectors. And what that means is that we all probably need to think about some level of AI literacy. Now, if you're just mostly going to be a consumer, I say think about this like driving a car. I do not know anything about what is under the hood and the engine of a car. Nothing. But I do know how to drive, and I do know how to use the brakes. I do know when I need to brake. I know the rules of the road. And so if you're thinking about AI as a consumer or a casual user, think about it like the literacy you would need to have to drive a car. But if you really want to think about it in terms of adjacent or helping and enhancing your career, think about it in terms of math and reading, which are still going to be super critical because they create those critical thinking skills that will be important for the ability to use the technology and to apply that cognitive friction and your own intuition and your own smarts about it. We definitely need to build the capacity for education, whether that's K through 12, whether that's post-secondary, whether that's college or beyond. We need to build that skill. And in this area, we also are really going to need those trade skills. There's right now about 450,000 electrician jobs open in the country, 450,000. That's only going to increase. So we really need to infuse AI literacy into all of these skills and sets. And look, business needs to play a role in terms of its own apprenticeship programs. Government needs to play a role in terms of its supporting research and education as well. And labor needs to play a role as well to think about those certificates and the training that will need to happen. Now, what I thought I'd do is just give you a little bit of sense of skills for today and tomorrow. This is from the World Economic Forum 2025. Core skills in 2025, you can see they're kind of divided by kind of human, uniquely human skills, ethics skills, business skills, and then kind of the engineering kinds of skills. If you look forward to what they're estimating for 2030, yes, the AI and the data stuff is that this is the fastest rising. It doesn't mean it makes the others disappear, but it's the fastest rising skills are in that sort of AI and the data. But 7 of the things from 2025 will be just as important in 2030. You know, they basically say that, you know, humans are just the species of invention of tools. I mean, from the very beginning of time, humans invented tools. Artificial intelligence is a tool. But humans are also the most resilient and adaptable. So it's going to be that combination of tools and resiliency, and you see more and more this notion of being a lifelong learner, because the technology will move sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but it'll go in spurts. And this notion of being able to think about not a particular job, but a career and lifelong learning, whatever that career is going to be important. Now, I wanted to talk about this for just a little bit. This is something that Microsoft released about a week ago. It's a diffusion report. You can find it if you look up, I think it's Microsoft on the issues. You can say AI diffusion report. You'll find it. It tells you by county what the level of use is, based on some telemetry measurements, of artificial intelligence. Around the country, you heard it was about 30%. Kansas, a little lower than that, about 28 or so %. You'll see the dark blue. Guess where those are? K-State is one, KU is the other. Those are the highest in the state. And the lowest are the rural counties, primarily, you know, on that western side of the state. If we're going to ensure that we keep everybody along, that we take care of everybody, we need to make sure that this diffusion goes across all of rural America, across all of these states. And you'll see generally, if you look at this data, that the rural counties are behind 15, 17, 18% on average than some of these more metropolitan counties. So again, I looked at K-State. You guys are doing amazing work. This will be part of what you all will do going forward. And it will reap in some ways great promises. There is really an important application of this for inventions to really benefit humanity. There are a couple of areas in particular that I want to highlight. The first is protein discoveries. This is an image from the University of Washington Protein Design Lab. The work that they are doing here in terms of vaccine development for disease and in terms of early detection of cancer is some of the best in the world, really some of the best in the world. And this sort of protein research in the healthcare area will be really, really important. A second big area is material science. This is an image from a Richland, Washington facility. Essentially, what they are doing, among many other things, for example, is finding ways to use materials other than rare earth materials, lithium, to use lower lithium for battery life. So there are ways in which we really need to expand on that material science too, for climate, for stewardship, and really to ensure that we can most efficiently use energy and other things. Now, I've talked a lot about broadly. This is my boss. Well, he was my former boss for 25 years, Brad Smith. He is the president of Microsoft. He wrote a book a couple of years ago entitled, this was the title of it. And he really makes the case that artificial intelligence can be used as a tool to benefit mankind, or it can be used as a weapon. The most important thing is that we're in control. We have to be in control of what those decisions are. We have to decide what computers should do, not just what they can do. And it really will be important for us to sometimes put some safety brakes on, to sometimes decide we don't want artificial intelligence to make these human critical decisions for us. That's the ethics part of it. That's the part that's important for all of us to think about as we go forward. Now, rural America really, there have been inventors in rural America forever and ever and ever. These folks from Petoskey to Gladys, Georgia, and other places have really played a strong role as the digital revolution came about in the 1960s. But today, we're kind of at a different frontier. We are at a stage where we really don't know all the things for the future of artificial intelligence, and particularly generative AI. We do know that we can shape the future in a positive way. We do know that AI can be used as a tool for good, to make rural Americans' lives better, to increase and improve on healthcare, to build businesses here that can really work around the world from our rural communities. I also know that the class of KARL class of 17 and the incoming class of 18 are going to lead the way. I really believe it. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you have a great night.